patient, me, diagnosed with a deadly illness that kills nearly all of the people that get the diagnosis. And I'll give you a little bit of a heads up. I passed through this process twice, right? The second time, the chances of surviving are nearly zero. So what I'm going to share with you is what happens when you hear about such a diagnosis, what happens when you get treated for such an illness, what happens in complications from the treatment, and so on. But what I want to do, more than anything, is to make this a conversational presentation. I don't want to spend a lot of time giving you a lot of medical details. What I would like to do is make this a give and take, so that at any time, if anybody has a question, please raise your hand. I will do my very best to answer it. I may show a slide that answers it, and so on. So I do have a few slides to show you, but I do want to make this a very informal conversation, as if you were in my living room. So I'm going to sit here, right in front of you, and you're all sitting, and we're just going to have a talk about what it's like to go through something like this. Okay, so the way it works is this. So about 5 years ago, in August of 2007, my son, my wife, and I were driving on the Mass Turnpike from Boston out to Western Massachusetts. We stopped to have a bite to eat, and when we came back with our food after getting it from the cafeteria, we sat down on a picnic bench, and lo and behold, my wife and my son said to me at the same time, "You're yellow. You're turning yellow. You have a yellow neck and head, and the whites of your eyes are all yellow. What, this is unbelievable." So right away, I knew that I had jaundice. Okay, I didn't know all the medical details related to jaundice, but I knew that I had to call my doctor right away. So I got on the phone to my doctor. He said, "Look, most likely what you have, we were talking on the phone, we haven't examined you. Most likely what you have, you may have a form of hepatitis." Okay. And I said, "Well, what about cancer? Is that a possibility?" He said, "Yeah, cancer's a possibility." I don't think he wanted to scare me, but he said, "It's a possibility." He said, are you in any pain?" I said, "No, I'm not in any pain at all. I'm just turning yellow." Okay. Little did I know that painless jaundice was a very clear sign of pancreatic cancer. Okay. And so that's where things were. He said, when you get to your destination tonight, go to the small town that you're in, get a CAT scan, and let's see what the results are. He said, it could be cancer, but, we need to rule it out. He didn't want to scare me. And Eddie, you have to picture this. It's late in August. Everything closes up in the Northeast, including the hospitals. People disappear on Friday afternoon. And, had I gone back to Boston, I would have faced massive traffic jams. Wouldn't have got there on time anyhow. And chances are a few hours here and there wouldn't have made a difference. Anyhow, so here we are. And where we are is looking at some statistics, right? Looking at some statistics. So let's go back and take a look. So the idea is, if you look at this, right? Isn't there a light that goes on?
The light's on the top.
Oh, the light's on the top. Okay. Let's close this other thing. Okay, so the idea is, how do I get back?
The lift button. The lift button.
Lift. I don't know what that is.
Lift button.
Yeah, but he's got that
Left.
open.
Yeah.
No, it's not going.
Click well, take that button.
We have lung cancer. These are approximate numbers. Over 200,000 people get lung cancer and breast cancer every year. Lung cancer about 75% fatal. Breast cancer about 25% fatalities. Pancreatic cancer 95%. So most of the time when you hear about pancreatic cancer, it's basically it's primarily a death sentence type thing. There's usually when you're diagnosed, the disease has spread too far to be treated. Okay, so one of the things that goes through your mind, having these tests done that night, I had to come back to Boston and get more testing done. But one of the things that goes through your mind is, well, you know, do I have cancer? If I have it, what am I going to get? And where am I going to go? And it turned out that 2 days later, after having 2 CAT scans, after having an endoscopic biopsy where they put a tube down your esophagus and they take a needle and put it in your pancreas and get a little sample and they analyze it for pancreatic cancer cells. Turns out that I got a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, okay, which obviously is tremendously earth-shaking to a person. My mother died from pancreatic cancer, so it was a very earth-shaking diagnosis, very scary diagnosis, and so on. Didn't know what was going to happen to me until I heard more details about this. Well, unfortunately, the tumor wasn't big, and the reason that I was turning yellow is that the tumor was right near my bile duct. So as the tumor grew, it basically occluded the bile duct, and I had increased production of bilirubin spilled into my blood, turned yellow. So, you know, one of the best treatment for pancreatic cancer, if the tumor is small, surgery is the best treatment because basically the chemoreceptor drugs don't kill pancreatic cancer. They can delay it in some people, they can kill a few cells, but they're not curative, right? The best way to do it is surgery. And as I said, you know, most people who get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, surgery is too late, right? It's spread too far. The pancreas is basically, you know, been taken over by the cells. The cells have gone into the person's lymph and spread into the liver, and the cancer is metastasizing, and it's going to basically kill this person. That's how it works most of the time. I fortunately had a very small tumor. I was scheduled for something called the Whipple procedure that I'll tell you about in a minute. But, you know, so that was the surgery. Okay. But then, you know, your family, all the physicians involved, and I had about 7 physicians, different physicians involved along the way because, of course, this is a protracted treatment. This is something that, you know, after the surgery, you've seen for a long time with radiation, chemotherapy, all sorts of things, the possibilities of complication. So this goes on for some time. So there's a lot of different medical specialties that get involved in something like this. So, of course, there's post-surgical complications that arise, and I'll show you why in a minute. And then there's the possibility of additional treatments, right? Going through chemotherapy obviously is not a pleasant experience. Concerns about that, concerns about, you know, your socioeconomic status, what's your insurance coverage going to be. All of these things go through the mind of people, and of course, the possibility of not being around, which is the worst of all of it. So there's lots and lots of things to consider. And there's other things to consider. How do you tell your family members? What is their status? Right? How do you tell someone in your family that you may not survive? Right? At that time, my daughter was about 25, my son was about 28. My daughter had a boyfriend. We thought that the best way to tell her about this was, because she was sort of, you know, exerting her independence from us, we're going to tell her boyfriend. They had been living together for a while, and we wanted to make this happen through him. We felt that he was the closest person that in her life at that time, and we felt we were better off telling him and letting him explain it to her. And I think in retrospect, it was a very good choice. The other thing, obviously, is, you know, you have to sort of, in addition to telling people, you have to sort of say to yourself, how am I going to deal with this? You know, am I going to crawl into a hole like most people who get a deadly diagnosis and basically withdraw, not talk to people, not sort of relate to the world, and be negative and complaining and bitchy and saying, why me? Why is this happening to me? And be angry about it. Okay. And my thought was, and it took a few days to get to this point. My thought was, I'm going to do the direct opposite because, you know, this is a situation that may be out of my control, and I want to do everything in my mental power not to be negative and not to waste energy dealing with the psychological implications of the disease. I knew I had to fight for my life. So my intention was I was going to be extremely positive with everyone, and that by radiating positive energy out to everybody, by cracking jokes, by being as upbeat as I could under the circumstances, that I would have people rallying around me rather than getting tired of my complaining and just, going away from me. And that way I would maintain a strong support group, which is what I really needed to deal with something like this. You have to have the support group around you. So what I'm going to show you is, and I've been talking about a lot of different things here, and again, if you have questions, be sure to raise your hand and ask. Yeah?
What was the condition of the liver?
There was no liver involvement, on the CAT scan. No liver involvement.
Bilirubin levels are normal? Or?
Well, what ended up happening is when they went in to do the pancreatic biopsy, they were able to clip off enough cells to open up the clogged bile duct, and within 24 to 48 hours, my jaundice basically disappeared. It disappeared before I had the surgery. So a little humor. I know I'm making this very dramatic. Let's have a little humor here. So the idea is that this guy's not feeling good. So he goes to the doctor. Doctor tells him he has 6 months to live. The guy says, "Doctor, I think I'd like a second opinion." Doctor says, "Okay, you're ugly too." So it's important to keep things in perspective, right? Because the fact is, all of us are going to die sometime, and the question is, do you want to be a winner in life? What lesson are you going to teach your children? If you go out complaining, if you go out miserable, if you go out, right, in a situation that is negative, right? Because everybody has to face this, including your family, your children, your, relatives, friends, whatever. You're going to teach them the wrong thing, I think. So my objective was to be as positive as I could. Okay, so again, there's many implications, right? There's a lot of implications, right? My physical state, my psychological state, my attitude. I have to tell you that I'm a scientist. I've been doing science for 40 years, right? And I believe very much in the black and white of science. Either it is or it isn't. Let's do an experiment and let's figure it out, right? But as Ed said, there's a lot of things we don't know about how the body works and how the mind and the body are connected, right? And there's a lot of things that we may learn, right? 50, 100, 200, 500 years from now about this, right? And what I'm going to share with you, you may think I'm wacky by telling you this, but I'm going to share with you some of the visualizations that I had. Because again, my objective was to put myself in the most positive frame of mind. And so, we're out in Western Massachusetts and we're talking to our neighbors about this, situation that suddenly arose. And when you start to open up to people about an illness as serious as that, you hear amazing stories that come back to you about people's own illnesses. And those stories, right, can lift you up higher because you're going to hear amazing stories of survival. So when I told one of my close neighbors that I had this diagnosis, he said, we never told anybody this story. And my story is that even though you see me out running marathons and I'm out rowing all the time and cross-country skiing and everything, my heart I had a massive heart attack, and my heart stopped 7 times in one day, and I had a big paddle 7 times. And I made it through, miraculously. I made it through. Okay. So that was one story I heard instantly. And the other story was from my neighbor on the other side. I said, "Look at this diagnosis. I know we're really worried." And they said, we have, this guy had thyroid cancer. He didn't tell anyone, and then he all of a sudden told me. So here I am, hearing these stories, and he said, I'm going to get through it. It's thyroid cancer. I have a treatable form of thyroid cancer. I'm going to get through it. And that was the beginning of this cycle of getting out a lot of positive energy out of me to affect others, and then hearing some really uplifting stories, very powerful stories that took me up to a higher state and made me more positive. So the story that I'm going to tell you has to do with a paranormal experience I had after talking about this with both of my neighbors. So I was walking from my living room right after the neighbors left, walking from my living room We crossed over a certain area, and as I was walking through the bedroom door, all of a sudden, bolts of energy, okay, hit me under the armpit, right on the ribs on both sides. And I had been walking, I was sort of, obviously down about this diagnosis, and I was sort of walking like this, and all of a sudden, uplifted, straight up, by bolts of energy. And I knew that that was a tremendous positive sign, because the bolts of energy, the directions that they came in, actually came from the directions of the houses where both of my neighbors lived. So, who knows what that is? I mean, maybe it's a lot of hokum, maybe it's a lot of baloney, but this is something that I experienced. And I had another very, very powerful visualization of positive energy after when I got the disease for the second time. That was also incredible, and I'll tell you about that later. But let's sort of stick to the story. And again, if you have questions, please ask. And of course, we won't get, the story is very long. There's many, many facets to it, both medical, psychological, sociological, and so on. So if any of you ever have any questions, right, you're students, you're at the beginning stage. If you ever have any questions, do not hesitate to drop by my office and talk to me about it. I am happy to meet with any of you in groups, individuals, whatever.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How long did it take before you gave the news to your children and your relatives, or your close relatives?
Well, our son was a U.S. Army veteran. He had just gotten back from Afghanistan at that time, and he was living with us, so we told him right away. And he was very positive. He said, look, we're on a mission. He just got out of the Army. He said, we're gonna get through this. We're gonna deal with this, and we're gonna get through it. Okay, so he was great. And my daughter, like I said, we told her boyfriend, and then he told her that night. And the crazy thing is that he was very serious and very somber when he told her, and she thought he was going to break up with her, so she should. So what are the implications for the family, the relatives and friends? Dealing with many different doctors, some amazing experiences I've had dealing with doctors in various specialties, and I want to share one of them if we have time with you today. How incredible the nurses were through this, and how understaffed some of the best hospitals in the world are, which is where I was treated, a world-class hospital for both my occurrences of this cancer. And how great all the hospital personnel were. And it makes a tremendous difference, even if the secretaries and receptionists are positive, it makes a tremendous difference to a patient. Okay, so this is a website called caringbridge.org. You see that? And this is the home page. And basically what it is it's a site for critically ill, very seriously ill patients, traumatic, a lot of people with cancer, other sorts of very bad stuff, to basically put their story on. So what you do is you write your story on there, and then you make journal entries. It's like a blog, right? You make journal entries, and then emails are sent to all your friends and relatives. They have the opportunity to respond. So again, it gives another vehicle for me. It's not like sending out greeting cards, phone calls. It's a great way to communicate with people because you only have to do it once. And the idea is, again, being extremely positive, which I was in everything that I wrote. I would spend a lot of time and get a lot of pleasure out of writing, various journal entries that I thought would be important for me to, get my catharsis out, and also helpful to other people and very upbeat. And I got back tremendous amounts of positive energy through this. So the jaundice, which we talked about. The other thing, this shows you the kind of biopsy procedure, which we don't need to get into, but this is basically what they do. An endotracheal biopsy, you push a fine needle through the duodenum, you take a little sample of the pancreas, you don't feel anything, and you're sedated during this. So that's how that works. This is if the tumor would have been in a different part of my pancreas. See, the tumor was in the head of the pancreas, which is the place you want to have it. Once it gets into the tail, it's really not treatable because the surgery doesn't work. You can't do the surgery if it's in the tail of the pancreas. So what is the surgery? Well, the pancreas is deep in the abdomen. You can see you're looking at a person's back here. Right? So the pancreas is underneath, right? The liver, the stomach in front of it, all of these things are in the way. So this is a very delicate surgery that they had to do with me. It's a surgery that started about 50 or 60 years ago, roughly. And at the time when it was first started, at least 25% of the patients died on the operating table because the surgery was that complex. It's much, much more complex than a heart transplant. Even though everybody thinks about a heart transplant being this very dramatic thing, which it is, it's a remarkable surgery. I've had the privilege of working in my research career with heart transplant patients, which is another story that I won't get into now. But this surgery is much more technically demanding than a heart transplant. Although heart transplants involve rejection and things like that afterwards, this surgery is much more technically demanding. It's right now, in the best of hands, it's a 7.5-hour surgery. In the old days, you know, when they first started, it was 15 hours surgery. 15 hours. Okay, so that's, you can see that many people died on the operating table. Okay, and I actually know a person who went through that. He's still alive. They were able to take the entire tumor out of the head of the pancreas. He had to spend a whole month in the hospital afterwards. My course was 7.5 hours of surgery, 8 days in the hospital. So this surgery is called the Whipple procedure. If you don't do it, if you're not on the team itself, chances are you will scrub into the surgery at some point in your training, because it's, you know, it's the method of choice for treating pancreatic cancer. And like most complicated surgeries, you want to go to a center that is very, very experienced. Johns Hopkins is one of the most experienced centers. They do, I think it's upward of 250 of these per year, which means basically every day they're doing them. Okay. But they have different teams of people that do them. Well, I was treated at a teaching hospital of Harvard Medical School in Boston called Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And the person who did my surgery, he personally, and his small team, they do over 150 a year personally. Okay, so they're doing it 2-3 times a week, basically. So you can see what's involved here, right? Here's the preoperative anatomy, right? Here's your head of your pancreas. You can see the duodenum wrapped around it. You can see the liver and the stomach and the gallbladder and bile duct. Okay. So what they do in the surgery is that they remove your gallbladder, because you don't need that, like a gallbladder surgery. You don't need that. They remove the common bile duct, okay, and it's a very small part of the duodenum, not enough to really make a difference. At least I haven't noticed that. Okay, and the idea is that they take the head of the pancreas out, and this is now the new situation. You can see the stomach is basically unchanged. It just has a different position in the abdomen. So that's how that works. And there's various videos on YouTube. This is one of the videos where you can actually see a live Whipple procedure done. So, many people, you know, Steve Jobs, I think, had this procedure done. Many people have had the Whipple procedure done. People who have operable, at least, pancreatic cancer with a tumor in the head of the pancreas. So this is my recovery after the Whipple. This is me in the hospital. This is like a day or two after it. It's hard to see, but I have my nasogastric tube is still in. So basically what they do is you can't take anything by mouth for 3 or 4 days because your digestive system is very, very sensitive. So for 2 or 3 days in total, your total IV, right, nutrition. And then I think it's like on the 4th day or so, you're allowed to take a few sips of water, and then maybe on the 5th day a little bit of applesauce. But it's mostly IV for most of the week, right? And then the last day or two, you're allowed to eat regular food. You can go out into the world again. You're not doing a heck of a lot for about a month afterwards because, you know, you have major stuff going on in your abdomen. So very tricky stuff. And I have to tell you one thing, that hospitals are very, very concerned not to put patients in pain. It's one of the things that they want to avoid at all costs. So they're always asking the patient, are you in pain? Are you in pain? And if you are, they'll medicate you, okay, right away. So I was never really in pain with this, right? I had some discomfort when they took the surgical clips out, after a couple of weeks or so. But I wasn't in any pain. One of the things that happens, though, is that from the deep anesthesia that you have, and maybe some of the gastrointestinal things, after about a month or 6 weeks, I suddenly developed this sort of an abnormal taste sensation, where everything I tasted tasted like oatmeal. It was bizarre, absolutely bizarre. So I like to eat. I've always been, and I never lost my appetite. That was one of the things, they always ask you with pancreatic cancer, you lost your appetite. And usually that means the cancer is spreading to your liver and you lose your appetite. So I've always had a very strong appetite before and after the Whipple. I was eating as much as I could whenever I could. So what I would do is, I like the taste of food, so I would go to the nearest Mexican restaurants or Indian restaurants and order the hottest food that I could, because I knew I could taste them, the spiciest food that I could, because I wanted the taste of food. So, and you can see my daughter and son with me. This is like 2 or 3 days after the Whipple in the hospital. Okay, so it turned out, come back to me. Don't look at the slide. Let's go back. Okay, so the idea is you're waiting, hopefully, you have your fingers crossed. Could they get the whole thing out? If they get the whole thing out, like they did in my friend, the 15-hour surgery 30 or 40 years ago, you can walk away. No chemo needed. And the whole idea is there enough margin, right, in what they took out? If there's a wide margin with no cancer, right, you can walk in many cases. Walk away. No chemo, no radiation. You're okay. I get the surgeon comes in after 8 days. He didn't have a smile on his face. We were hoping that he would. He came in and he said this. He said, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that we were able to remove over 99% of the tumor. The bad news is that there were a few cells at the margin, okay? So, what do you do from here? Well, my wife was very nervous, obviously, so she said, well, what are his chances? And I didn't care to know at that point what my chances are. And what he said was that in this particular situation that you're in, if there are a few cells at the margin, you basically have a 40% chance to live 5 years. Now remember, that's an overall statistic. Right? I was a good candidate for this surgery because I've been lifelong extremely healthy. Although my mother died of pancreatic cancer, my father was one of these people that never got sick. I would hardly ever get sick. I've always been very physically active, exercised a lot, watched my diet, never did drugs, never smoked, all of these different things. So all of these things were in my favor. Plus my attitude was great. I had great doctors. I was in the top hospital, right? But in spite of that, they have to give you the statistic. The statistic is 40% chance to live 5 years. And you said, well, if you make it through 5 years, you're in the 40%, right? 5 years is normally the cutoff. Right? If you can get through without a reoccurrence, then usually, even though they don't know for sure if there's no cancer cells in your body, the chances of a reoccurrence are very, very, very slim. Okay? So that's a 5-year cutoff. So the way it works is that what do you do with the few cells? Right? So there's new treatments that are maybe 10, 15 years old for these few cells. One is called cyberknife radiation. There's another that's called gamma knife radiation. In the hospital that I was being treated at, the cyberknife was used, and basically what the cyberknife radiation is, as opposed to conventional radiation, which is, a more extreme form of sun tanning, basically. They pass a radiation machine over your belly, back and forth, for about 45 minutes in that. What this is very high intensity blasts of radiation. Kill the cancer cells dead on, right on those spots. So what they do is that they give you a CAT scan, and the CAT scan is used to place guidance beads made of graphite in your abdomen, right at the point where the cells are. Okay. right at the point where the cells are. And then, you can only do this one time in this kind of situation. You go into a room and you have this computerized robot that's in there that's blasting you with lasers, basically, with high-intensity blasts and stuff. It's very Star Wars-like. They shut off all the lights. You just see this red beam coming at you, and it, for like an hour to an hour and a half, it moves around like in a big circle, almost like an orbit, and it hits the cells from every conceivable angle, right, to kill them. And these radiation oncologist guys, they're very big on this stuff. They know all about it, and they just, the guy I had was great. He gave me tremendous hope. He basically said, we'll take care of it. So that's how that works. Okay, then after that, then you go through the normal stuff, right? They let you recover from the CyberKnife for 3 to 4 weeks, and you go through conventional abdominal radiation. This thing passes over your abdomen, it's like one pass this way, one pass that way. It's 28 total treatments, right? Each one is about 45 minutes, 5 days per week, right? So if you do that, it's about 5.5 weeks of it. And what you do, in addition to getting the radiation, you also have to take chemo pills. Chemo pills, these particular pills that I took is called Xeloda. Xeloda is a chemotherapy drug that you take by mouth that weakens the cancer cells so that when they're hit with the radiation, there's a greater likelihood that they can be killed. Okay? And that's basically to either stop or retard spread of the cancer from any of those remaining cells out to your other abdominal organs, right? That's the idea of that kind of a treatment. Now, chemotherapy, IV, treats your entire body systemically with chemotherapy. And that's what I did after. I had about a month break after the radiation to sort of get my strength back. And believe me, as much as I like to work out, I was working out through all the radiation treatments. I wasn't doing 100% of my full workout, but I was doing 70 to 80% working out through that. So, you can, if you're motivated to stay fit and healthy, you can do this kind of stuff. Okay. So the chemotherapy started, right? Remember I told you this is like August. I had the Whipple on August 28th of 07. It was about a month later I had or early in October I had the CyberKnife. And then in late October I started the chemotherapy. So that actually, it brought me up to Thanksgiving Day, right? So we're getting ready for this big Thanksgiving dinner. We're going to celebrate the end of my radiation therapy. And what happens is that we had a slate tiled bathroom with rough slate, and I go in there, and I don't remember what happened, but I lost my balance, and I ripped almost all the skin off the bottom of my foot. So I had to go into the emergency room, and it was so painful to have that done, right? And this is on time, and at the same time, my wife had a lump in her breast, which they didn't know if that was going to be breast cancer or not. So all of this is happening at one time. Okay? So I go into the hospital, and I basically had to take, propanol, or what is this, knockout drug, because it was so painful, they couldn't touch it. I was jumping through the roof, right? So they had to give me that, and then they could stitch up the bottom of my leg and treat it and so on. So, okay, so that's Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving dinner was gone. Okay. So then, right after the New Year started, then we started the tough stuff, which is chemotherapy. This is the hardest thing I've ever been through. And much harder than 2-a-day football practices and things like that. So chemotherapy is, just you get blasted with the stuff in your vein. And the idea is that you have it once a week over 12 treatments. And because it's such a powerful thing, you typically do it 3 weeks on, and they give you a week to recover, and then you start again for the next month, and you do it over 4 months, this kind of thing. And basically, the way it works is that you don't feel that bad after the first few treatments, but as the treatments wear on, as you progress through the course of it, the fatigue becomes cumulative. And, when you get into, about halfway, 60% there, basically your life consists of, you wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, go back and take a nap. wake up, have lunch, go back, take a nap, wake up, have dinner, go to sleep, and wake up in the morning again. That's pretty much what it was. Extreme fatigue. I tried to work out at the beginning, but I had to give up. It was overwhelming fatigue. And it's just, it's like crushing. It's like basically somebody's just pounding on you, crushing you. I never lost my hair. I never once got sick to my stomach. And I one time felt that I was going to get nauseous, but I decided I was going to talk myself out of it. I'm not nauseous. People have a lot more power over what they feel than what they think. So basically, and the other thing to know about the chemo is that you have the chemo in a chemo room, right? So before you go into this chemo room, you're not really around a lot of other cancer patients except when you go for your appointment with your oncologist. You don't really see it graphically, but when you go in the chemo room, right, this is not the chemo room that I was treated in, but that's a typical chemo room. There's rows of chairs set up, and everybody's got their IV drip of the chemo stuff going in, okay? And you see people that just terribly weak, loss of hair, grimacing, very uncomfortable. And here I was feeling pretty darn good. True, I had a deadly disease, but the way I looked at it, I was pretty darn well off compared to the people around me. So, but being in that room really made you feel, yeah, I'm really a cancer patient. I'm in there with the hardcore folks. I'm in there with people who are really, really suffering through terrible chemo reactions and all sorts of things, loss of hair, maybe had breast cancer, were disfigured, and so on. Okay, so before we get to that, okay, so then I'm through with chemo, right? And this is in 2008, in like April time. And I start going about my business and trying to get back into the world, right? And then, get back, start teaching again, doing whatever. And then, what was it? A little more than 2 years later, a little more than 2 years after I finished the chemo, or about 3.5 years since my diagnosis, I go in, you get regular checkups. You go in, every 3-4 months, you have your CAT scan or MRI to look at either your liver, right? They'll do an MRI of your liver, because that's the first place it's likely to spread. Or they'll do a CAT scan, neck to groin, all the organs, right? Your lungs, all your abdominal organs, because those are the places where it's most likely to spread first. You'll go in, you'll either have one of those. The other test that you'll get is called the CA19-9. It's a very important tumor marker. It's basically, it measures something that pancreatic tumor cells and some other types of tumor cells shed off, and it goes into your blood. And, my numbers, the cutoff number of abnormal is 37. It's a logarithmic scale. So if you're above 37, that's not good. If you're below 37, that's good. Before my first surgery, I was at about 120, which is high, but it's not like the end of the world. If you read some of the books about Steve Jobs, the professor who died, Randy Pausch, the last lecture, there's 2 bestsellers in the last couple of years on dying from pancreatic cancer. Those folks, other people that I've read books about, it's in the thousands, right? When the cancer gets really advanced, it's in the thousands, okay? So when mine was 120, small tumor at the beginning, after the surgery, in the teens, right? In the teens, even though I had a few cells remaining. There wasn't a lot of activity. And they were doing it very frequently though. So they could watch this thing, on a weekly, monthly basis and so on. And after the CyberKnife, it stayed low, basically. So it was low pretty much all the time. Okay. So, but then I go in for my routine checkup in May of 2010, and I have a liver, I think it was a liver MRI or a CAT scan, I don't remember, and they see something in there. Okay. And so they said, well, look, we have to take a biopsy of this. This looks like it might be a tumor. Right? They checked my CA19-9, it was 220. Okay. So, you know, the CA19-9 is not perfect. Sometimes you have false positives and false negatives. But in my case, because it did show a correspondence to the cancer and the treatment, my CA19-9 was considered to be valid. So they said, look, you know, we have to do a liver biopsy. So what they do in a liver biopsy is, did I have that? I thought I had that in here somewhere. Yeah, I must have forgot to put it in. But they basically have, you know, they just stick something between your ribs, right? It's CAT scan guided. You have a little piece of your liver taken out. It doesn't, you don't just feel pressure. You don't really feel much. Right? And they take it out and they analyze it, and I have a tumor in my liver. The tumor in the liver basically means kiss of death, you know. My oncologist was away. He was having some health problems, and I had a new oncologist in there. And he looks at my chart, he looks at me, he goes like this, just kind of feeling my lymph nodes, very casually. He said, oh, it's in your lymph, you know, and you know, he was talking about palliative care, right? End of life, reduction of pain, and months, right? And I said, wait a minute, you don't know what's in my lymph. When I didn't tell you this, but when I had my Whipple procedure, and they sampled many lymph nodes, there was all the lymph nodes were cancer-free. I said, you don't know if it's in my lymph, maybe it's just in my liver. You don't know that. He said, well, you know, we've never had a case in this hospital where pancreatic cancer is spread in the liver and anybody has survived. Everybody has died, basically. I said, well, but let's follow the procedures and let's see what's going to happen. And they're almost refusing to do it. And they basically said, you know, we're going to have a tumor conference in a few days. We're going to call in all these people and we're going to make your case one of the cases that we discussed. And it turned out that the liver surgeon who was called in, he had operated on someone a number of years ago who had pancreatic cancer that spread to the liver. He took the tumor out and the person was okay. Rare, but it can happen. So it was decided at that time, because I was very fit, healthy, you know, and I was not in my 70s. They said if you had been 10 years older or so, you know, we wouldn't be doing this. But you know, and then you're back to the whole thing. What about the surgery again? Major abdominal surgery again, okay, and likely major chemo again. Going through the whole thing that I had been through. What a crushing kind of a thing when you think you're past it, and then it comes full force at you again, right? Very tough situation. And that time, that really got to me psychologically. It was very tough because, you know, after you get a doctor basically telling you that, you walk out of the hospital and you're speechless. You cannot say anything. It was the longest time, I think, that I have ever remained silent, said nothing. There's nothing to say. What do you say? And finally you say, well, you know, I think we should have, you know, have further tests. So they do it. Well, the next test is a PET scan, right? A PET scan can detect cancer cells like pancreatic cancer all over the body for certain kinds of cells, right? And it turned out that I had a good colleague of mine from St. Martin who was a pathologist. I had actually presented my case in front of his class. He had me as a sample patient. And he had seen my pathology report, and he said, the kind of pancreatic cancer cells you have will show up on the PET scan. Okay. So I said, let's go for it. So the morning of the PET scan, you know, I was scared. I've never been so scared because I knew that this test either meant life or death. It was only in my liver. So I had liver surgery. And here I am. And a lot of you see me in the gym a lot, so you know I'm still pretty fit and work out. You know, my CA19-9 right after the liver surgery went down to 5, which is as low as you could possibly get, and now it's around 10 most of the time. So it's in the low normal range, and all my tests are clean. And what they basically said is, I didn't go through chemo the second time. Okay, because what ended up happening, I didn't tell you this, but do I have a minute or two to continue, or should we break it? 3 minutes, okay. So one of the complications, now this is big time medicine that you need to know about, post-surgical issues, what patients go through, right? You walk around with drains in your abdomen, because the liver is an area that's very prone to infection. So I came home from the hospital after the liver surgery. I only stayed there 2 days, and I was home. Okay, I wasn't moving quick, but I was out of the hospital, right? About 48 hours later, my temperature goes up to 105, and it's in the middle of the summer. It's broiling hot. My temperature is cooking me. I'm trying to walk to the emergency room, having difficulty walking in, right? I have this massive liver infection. So the liver infection was almost as lethal as the cancer, because the liver infection went on. I had to stay in the hospital for 3 weeks fighting this infection, and they didn't know what it was. They were plating cultures on me daily to try to figure out what the hell was in this guy, right? And they couldn't figure it out. I had all these infectious disease experts, and they couldn't figure it out. And basically, what it was they just gave me general purpose antibiotics. They threw the whole kitchen sink. And finally, it subsided, but I still had to stay on a home course, right? I still had some infection that was mild. So they send you home with 1 or 2 tubes sticking out of your abdomen that look like this. Then you have drains. See these things? These are drains that you wear. So you wear them wherever you go, right? If you're home, right? If you go to a wedding, underneath my tuxedo, I'm wearing them. You put a safety pin in your pants. They have to be below the area of the infection. So all of the pus and infection fluid can drain out of there. And guess what? You have to take care of yourself. They can't have nurses doing this. The healthcare costs would skyrocket. You have to be the person who does that, right? And then you're constantly going back to make sure the drains are placed right. So I must have had about 15 CAT scans that summer, trying to figure out if the drains were in the right place to drain the fluid out of it. Because it's only when the fluid stops can they be certain that the infection is over. And the infection can kill you. So it's a very tricky business. And my surgeon, fortunately, was not only a great surgeon, but his medical care in staying with this infection until it was completely dry was unsurpassed. Okay. Other things, right? Fluid gets right. The liver is right near the lungs. Fluid from the infection can get in your lungs. So I had to have my lungs aspirated twice, and that's a pretty unpleasant procedure. Right? You have to stick a needle in the back, right through your ribs, into your pulmonary area, and just withdraw fluid, basically, and you just end up coughing for about 15 minutes after. So that was one of the most unpleasant parts. Okay. Another thing is that I had to walk around because I had to give myself IV, and this is important, right? I had 3 months of walking around in real life with a catheter in my superior vena cava. Okay. So the catheter goes in, you can see in the brachial vein, they advance it into the superior vena cava, and it just stays there, right? And I actually had this done 3 times because I had clots in that catheter, and they were afraid the clots would break loose. They had to change the catheters. I had to give myself, I'll show you on the next slide, but this is what the catheter looks like. You have to have nurses come once a week to change the dressing and make sure it's clean and not infected. And then you also have to give yourself, I was doing this, right, every day, morning and night, antibiotics, belly injections,